Someone at Dell finally figured rather than having a separate entry-level branding for our gaming laptop, why don't we just make it part of the Alienware series? As simple as the idea sounds, it took them nearly a decade to come to that conclusion, but better late than never, right? Introducing the Alienware 16 Aurora, Dell's entry-level gaming laptop replacing the former G16 series of laptops. Now, it has been spec'd with the latest hardware to compete with the likes of the HP Victus, for example, so the configuration we have here today in particular is rocking Intel's Core 7 240H processor, 32GB of DDR5 memory. We've also got Nvidia's RTX 5060 graphics with 8GB of VRAM, a reasonably large 1TB solid-state drive, Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth version 5.4 standards, and of course this is a 16-inch display. Now look, entry-level laptops, or entry-level gaming laptops in particular, have actually gotten a lot more expensive, so the bar is also higher, which is why I'm gonna make sure I give you guys a genuinely honest idea of exactly what you can expect with this machine, and whether or not it's the right gaming laptop for your needs, so let's get into it. Shout out to Dell for actually putting effort in the Alienware 16 Aurora's packaging. It actually has a cool graphical animation on the box, and when you open it up, it's very presentable. Behind some more protective packaging, here it is, the 16 Aurora itself, but more on that in just a minute. We also do get a mid-size 180 watt charging adapter. Yes, that is considered mid-size in today's standards. Nonetheless, past that, we do have a wall outlet charging cable piece, which is good for extendability, of course, and then some basic documentation that'll help you get started. At first glance, I was a little concerned that because this is in fact a rebranded G16, it might not live up to the standards we expect with Alienware devices as far as build quality is concerned, but I was, for the most part, pleasantly surprised. You do get a 1/3 metallic exterior with the top lid, and the rest of the laptop, while having a plastic finish, has a lot of layering, and it's actually thick plastic, which means it's durable, it's rugged, and it should last for the years to come. Can't say I'm the biggest fan of the more minimalist design here. It barely looks like a gaming laptop, and that black color is quite dull over here, but nonetheless, it does serve its purpose as an entry-level gaming device. Now, with that said, it does have a modest weight of 5.5 pounds. That is actually slightly below the average for your typical 16-inch gaming laptop, so that's kind of a good thing actually, and it does have a little bit of fingerprint magnetism. The I/O port selection here is okay, I suppose. So on one side, you have the heat exhaust vent, you have a USB-A super speed port, you do have a RJ45 port, and of course the good old headphone jack. On the rear side, you have some more heat exhaust vents, and then you will notice you have one more USB-A port, you have two Type-C ports with power delivery and DisplayPort version 1.4 functionality, and then you have a HDMI 2.1 port, and of course the charging port. And then on the other side, you don't have any I/O ports, you just have the heat exhaust vent, a lack of an SD card reader here, alongside not having any Thunderbolt whatsoever, is a little bit disappointing, but not completely out of the norm. The bottom side of the laptop, again, pretty standard stuff. You do have a removable plastic lid over here. Now you will notice that you actually have very few air intake vents that might have some thermal implications. We'll talk about that later on. And then you'll also notice on either corner you do have the speaker grills. We'll do a sound test later on in the video. Unfolding this laptop actually presents you with a decent amount of palm rest space. Unfortunately, the choice of color and the plain looks overall give it a very mundane look in my opinion. Nonetheless, when you come to the center, you do have a below average size trackpad here with a plastic surface finish, but to Dell's credit, there is very little flex over here and a great amount of tactility, making this one of the best trackpads I've seen on an entry-level gaming machine, so shout out to Dell over there. Unfortunately, that same level of quality does not translate over to the keyboard. You've got small keycaps here for a 16-inch form factor, they're compressed, you've got small arrow keys. The backlighting is decent, though you don't get RGB. Thankfully, you do get a full-size 10 keypad over here for number crunching productivity. But the real problem I have with this keyboard is the very limited key travel, as well as the non-existent tactility, creating a soft and mushy experience which just doesn't feel on par with what Dell used to have with their G16 laptops. On a much better note, Dell has actually created one of the best hinge mechanisms I've seen on a gaming laptop in recent history. Yes, you have a plastic hinge here, however the two-tier mechanism here is tight. It doesn't wobble a lot, it seems durable, and you get a 180-degree tilt. This is actually one of the best hinges I've seen on not just an entry gaming laptop, but pretty much bar to most gaming laptops in general, so thank you so much Dell for proving you can actually have good hinges on budget PC laptops. Yes! With that said, of course, you do have a plastic encasing all around the display, which is pretty normal in this class category. You do have a somewhat noticeable chin at the bottom, though it's not too dramatic. The bezels on the side are quite narrow and immersive, which is nice to see. And you have a reasonably thin forehead at the top, though you do get a 720p webcam at the center, which is actually kind of disappointing because pretty much all the competition now offers full HD, so it's not going to be a particularly great experience. The display quality here is actually pretty decent for what it is. So you have a 16-inch IPS panel, a Quad HD Plus resolution, you do get a 16:10 aspect ratio, you have a decent 120Hz refresh rate, 144Hz would have been a little bit better, but we can live with 120. And then for whatever reason, Dell opted to give you just 300 nits of peak brightness. While you do have a anti-glare coating on this display, sometimes the brightness does fall short admittedly. At least 350 nits would have been better, but here we are. Now, on a better note, you do have a 100% sRGB color rating, which is fantastic because you can use this laptop for color sensitive activities like photo or video editing. In terms of technical specifications, Dell, as usual, offers a lot of configurations, and the Alienware 16 Aurora is no exception to that. So the model we have here specifically is rocking Intel's Core 7 240H processor, which is actually standard no matter which configuration you get. We do have 32GB of DDR5 memory, though you can downgrade to 16GB of DDR5 memory and shave a few bucks off. Now, depending on where you are in the world and the configurations available to you, this model specifically comes with NVIDIA's RTX 5060 with 8GB of VRAM and a max wattage of 85. However, you may also have the option to downgrade to a RTX 4050 instead, or upgrade to a more powerful RTX 5070. In terms of performance, this is a very capable device as far as general productivity goes. Whether it's surfing the web or crunching some Word documents, it's obviously going to be a breeze. More demanding productivity like programming and code compilation, again, thanks to the ample amount of system memory here, is going to be a very fluid experience. You can even do some fantastic work on applications like Blender that are 3D intensive, and you can add a lot of customization elements to a scene without any frame drops. It is a very smooth and capable experience. Now, as far as 4K video editing goes, I was again happy to see that having 32GB of memory and the Core 7 240H processor provide you with all the power you need to actually stack up multiple layers of 4K footage without any visible frame drops. Of course, when you start color grading, having that RTX 5060 backing you up can provide some further support in the GPU department, so a nice experience, and render times are also quite fast. Okay, so let's talk about gaming performance now. Our results were decent, but also kind of mixed, and I do believe a lot of this has to do with poor driver optimization either on Dell's part or NVIDIA's part, maybe a combination of both. So your results might actually vary by the time you get this laptop, but here's everything we found at the time of testing. So games like Doom Eternal, for example, which are modern day AAA titles that are super well optimized, are able to comfortably run at 110 frames per second at the native resolution with DLSS enabled, which means you can truly utilize that 120Hz display and play at the highest settings and have a great experience. Less demanding games like Counter-Strike Go 2, for example, are able to run at 119 FPS. In fact, again, truly utilizing the 120Hz display here with everything completely maxed out at the native resolution. Now, you will find that games like Expedition 33, which are far more newer and of course are a little less optimized, were running at 88 frames per second. We found that we did have to keep these settings at high to achieve those higher FPS. If you try to max that out, that does drop to the low 60s, but again, a pretty decent number. Now, Cyberpunk 2077, for whatever reason, with frame gen enabled as well as having DLSS enabled, was barely hitting 59 frames per second on average at the native resolution. In fact, if you want to get a higher FPS, you are going to have to drop to the full HD resolution. Not a bad number, but the 8GB of VRAM here might also be a limiting factor. Now, it's worth noting that games like Cities Skyline 2, which are far more dependent on the processor, were actually performing very poorly. At the native resolution, we were hitting just around 33 frames per second, which is not a great number. Now, I'm not sure if this is because the Intel Core 7 240H chip just doesn't have, again, the right optimization for this game, or if something else is going on, but again, this performance is a good 30 FPS less than a lot of the competition like the HP Victus, for example. Now, games like Enshrouded did not actually run at all. We were stuck at 0 FPS and they just wouldn't load. So I do believe, again, there's some software shadiness going on over here. Here's a result of all the games we tested, so you guys get an idea of exactly what you can expect. Thermals are decent, but that limited air intake over here does have consequences. For example, under unrealistic peak load, this laptop can hit an average surface temperature right around 43 degrees Celsius, which is a little bit on the warmer side. A more realistic sustained load will yield you around 40 degrees Celsius, still not a great number, but a more realistic one nonetheless. Now, as far as fan noise is concerned, it's actually pretty decent, so we found numbers hovering around 60 decibels, give or take a few decibels here and there. Again, pretty normal for a typical gaming laptop with a dual fan setup. In terms of self-upgradability, Dell's done a great job, so both the DDR5 slots are upgradable here. You also do have two M.2 slots, both of them are capable of fitting a 2280 drive, and then of course the Wi-Fi module is also upgradable with another M.2 card, so you can replace that down the road. We actually get a reasonably large 96 watt hour battery over here. However, given the heavy duty hardware, you can expect about 5.5 hours of runtime, even with a general productivity use case. This is entirely normal for a gaming laptop. You should not be expecting to run these kind of machines on battery in the first place, if I'm being dead honest. With that said, the disappointment here is the speaker system. You basically got a petite 4-watt speaker system here that barely produces volume. It doesn't have a lot of highs and lows. It's very bare bone basic. Here's a quick sound test for reference.
It's 5 a.m. Ain't nobody see the work that I'm putting in. Something deep inside a thirst. I can feel it in my skin. Look around me, it's a curse. Just think I'm losing all my friends. And overnight success, what they're calling in the end. I got this hunger inside of me, violently scratching and clawing the scars.
With a price tag of $1,500 for the 16 Aurora that we reviewed here specifically, this is actually a pretty reasonable machine. Yes, this price tag is expensive, though keep in mind you can always downgrade certain components and significantly reduce the price tag by as much as $500 or increase it a little bit with some more powerful hardware. But regardless of which one of the models you get, there's few consistents that are up there kind of across the board. For example, you get some nice build materials here. So you have a mixture of metallic and high quality plastic exteriors that make this a rugged and durable Alienware device. You also get a pretty decent display, a good trackpad. While I/O ports could be a little bit more modernized, they are decent enough. The only thing that's really holding this laptop back, in my honest opinion, is its software performance. Dell and its partners definitely have to do some more optimization around their drivers on this machine, so you can actually get better frame rates and general performance. A lot of the games, which I think are actually sub-performing, simply because, again, the hardware is there, but the software isn't necessarily keeping up, and that's something that thankfully can be fixed and might be a non-existent issue by the time you get this laptop. I really hope that's the case. I do believe that this laptop is a better value when it's on sale, and it does go on sale. I've seen this particular configuration go off as much as like $400. Just keep an eye out, and when it does go on sale, I do believe this is one of the best entry-level gaming laptops out there, and it's one of the best laptops that Dell has created in a while. I really do respect this device for what it's trying to be, and I can definitely recommend it in that capacity. Let me know what you think of this machine. If you already have it, I'd love to hear your thoughts, and if you guys enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing to our channel and liking this video. It genuinely helps me grow and means the world to us as a channel. Catch you in the next one.